Upon Roosevelt's death on April 12, 1945, President Truman immediately sought foreign policy information and advice from those State Department officials in his administration who he naturally assumed would have the most comprehensive knowledge of the subtleties of the Soviet-American relationship. Early briefings by Undersecretary Joseph Grew, a firm advocate of a tough-stance approach to negotiations with the Soviet Union, guided Truman's thinking and were strongly reinforced by the returning Harriman. The new president believed that the best course to follow was one of strict adherence by both sides to agreements already negotiated. But just as Admiral Leahy had warned Roosevelt at Yalta about the elasticity of Stalin's agreement to hold free elections throughout Eastern Europe, principally made for public consumption in the United States, he made it clear to Truman that the Declaration of Liberated Europe could be read two ways, and it would be a serious matter to break with the Russians. Unfortunately for Truman, it wasn't immediately clear to him that Roosevelt, painfully familiar with State Department leaking and evasions of his intent, had chosen to be his own State Department when it came to matters concerning the other two-thirds of the Big Three, Stalin and Churchill. One very noticeable result of this was that, until Yalta, no Secretary of State had even been part of the U.S. delegation at these bipartite or tripartite conferences. Even then, Secretary Stettinius was denied knowledge of Stalin's pledge to go to war against Japan. In a private conversation with Roosevelt, Stettinius asked whether there was some aspect of the Far East negotiations that the State Department ought to know about. Military considerations, however, remained paramount, and it was critical that Stalin's agreement to enter the Pacific War remain a closely held secret if the Soviets' vulnerable buildup in the Far East was to proceed unmolested. Roosevelt's reply, according to Stettinius, was that Harriman alone had handled the matter, which was primarily military in any case, and that it had best remain that way. Admiral Leahy retained possession of the signed document, and upon his return to Washington, he locked it in the president's personal safe. The document was made available to Truman after Roosevelt's death and to incoming Secretary of State Jimmy Burns ahead of the Potsdam Conference, but its actual text was not released to the press until February 11, 1946, 1 year after it was signed by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin.